Hi, I'm Bridger Fates with Master Stockman Consulting, and we're going to talk about applying research to farms and ranches. And really, it's important to be able to understand whether it makes economic sense on your farm or ranch, some of these research projects that we're working on. Today, Brian Sabati is going to talk to us about fodder beets and how you might use fodder beets for an additional grazing resource on your farm or ranch. With that, let's go to Brian Sabati and out on to one of his test plots.
For many livestock producers, we're always in search of different forages that we can use, especially later into the fall and early winter. One of those new things that's coming out there and becoming a little bit more popular are fodder beets. So here we have some fodder beets next to us. This is just a proof of concept type of trial. Essentially, these look exactly like you might find with sugar beets. Obviously, they're a little bit different colored, but what we're looking at is a bulb that can be consumed by livestock as well as the above ground biomass. So these are really great. We have some information and some research that's been done through a Western SARE grant, looking at how these might be able to be incorporated in many different livestock operations and then actually incorporated as a late season forage. So these are great because they stand up really nice and tall. We can actually come in with livestock, go through and actually just graze them. We don't actually have to harvest them. You can harvest them mechanically through different means, which is possible. But this is great because we can have animals come through, munch off the tops, kick over the bottoms, eat the bulbs, and then we have a great high energy diet that's available for a lot of our animals. These will need to be supplemented with different types of protein, such as alfalfa or different things to balance out rations, but this is a really great option that's out there. Another important thing to know is that with what we have here and what we've noticed through the Western SARE grants is that weed control is really important. Obviously making sure that these beets get plenty of nutrients as well, so thinking about high rates of nitrogen is an added cost, of course, but it really does help improve forage production.
So we chose these projects to look at them in terms of how we help producers evaluate research on their own operations. But Ryan, why did you choose specifically the fodder beet project?
Yeah, I picked that just really thinking about, what are some ways that we can extend some grazing, some types of different forages that we have out there, getting into the fall, late winter, things that produce a lot of forage that's usually high quality, and things that we haven't really thought about a whole lot, and also something that we don't have to use a lot of mechanical equipment to harvest. So what's great about those is we can actually go out there with some just electric fence, something that's pretty low input, and go out and actually harvest those with the animals during a critical part of the year when they need that supplement. So yeah, that's why I picked that one.
All right, I kind of like that project. At first I was a little suspect when I thought about grazing fodder beets and wondered how cattle or sheep would take to it, and if it takes some getting to know them. But not only the videos online that you see, but even the video of the sheep experiment that we did, the animals really took to them a lot better than I thought they might right away, and it looks like they've really utilized those.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of an adjustment time, Bridger. There are some great videos that are out there, and with anything, it takes a little bit of time, as was noticed in the study that we chose. Just getting those animals adjusted, figuring out that ration is really important as you move forward with using them.
I think my favorite thing about them is the ability that you would have as a second crop or in a crop rotation. If you have the right crop rotation, you have the available water, you can use those fodder beets to actually make a second production crop or a more production. You get to utilize it at a time of year when high quality feed's really not available. I really like the thought of just adding it to things that are already working. So that's what I like about the project.
All right, so to follow up a little bit on our introduction that we had, where we were actually talking a little bit about our Western SARE project, that's project FW 18-013, which is talking about fodder beets. What we're really talking about is going more into depth here about what actually happened on the ground with this project and some of the things that worked well, didn't work well, but just giving a really big overview and summary of what happened with this project. So this project was actually completed in Burns, Oregon. Um, it's a great part of the country for fodder beets to actually be put into the ground, grown to actually help with livestock production for this part of the country. And hopefully this can actually be translated to other parts of the Western US as well. What they found was actually about 6 tons per acre of dry matter. Obviously, they anticipated some more. We'll go into a little bit of some of the things that held them up, maybe decrease the actual yields for this crop. But this is what they ended up with. So, 6 tons is great if we think about the dry matter component, but it's also really amazing to think about that this actually could have been more. 6 tons per acre, as they've pointed out in the research project, is actually higher than most of the crops for the area. So that's really promising to think about. Here we've got a crop that we can actually put into the ground. Potentially we're able to actually just graze it in the ground where it's at. We may not actually have to harvest or lift it out of the ground. So this is something that would be really awesome, really great to have to increase production for that area. The way it was planted is about 22-inch rows. So it's a fairly big row, but that's fairly common for a similar crop of, say, sugar beets. The other thing that's important is about 4.5 inches between, 4 to 5 inches between the spacing of the plants. So the idea is to give enough space between those plants that they actually have room to physically grow. The thing about fodder beets is they get a really big bulb portion of the plant. Obviously, they get some really big leaves that start to grow as well. But we want to make sure that there's plenty of space left between those so they aren't crowding each other out. So we end up with smaller bulbs. Plants are competing too much for resources, and we just end up with less healthy plants. The other thing that's interesting is they made some really good points to point out that cattle struggle to gain weight until the rations were adjusted. So I think this is a really important thing to consider if you're considering this for your property or other ways to implement fodder beets into a grazing system or a feed system, is really thinking about that time to adjust, getting those beets to incorporate into an animal's diet, whether it's cattle or sheep. Here, obviously, it was fed to cattle, but it was really important that they noted that you really think about that ration, adjusting it slowly into that diet, so it doesn't end up becoming an issue. So again, if they had done this at the beginning, they probably would have had decreased costs and also an increase in weight gain that the animals would have experienced. So this is a really important thing to consider. All right, so we'll get into a little bit more about some prices, some things like that. The beets were about $126.84 per ton, whereas corn was about $200 per ton. Hay that was used was about $135 per ton that was used in the study. The cost of beet fed calves was higher than the control group. Again, if we go back to some of the rations, the issues with getting that ration established, that was probably where some of those issues happened as far as being a little bit more expensive. The amount of fertilizer that was applied was much less than the crop demands, and fell short due to a lack of funding for the grant. So that's the other thing about fodder beets, is making sure that they have enough nutrients so that they can properly grow during the active growing season, and actually get everything that they need so there aren't any issues. The other important thing as far as the actual agronomy considered with this crop is thinking about weed control. So again, weed control is a major issue. So depending on where these plants are put into the ground, if there's already an existing really bad weed problem, this could be something that could be an issue. Again, thinking about types of pesticides that might need to be used, specifically herbicides for control on the weeds, that would be a really important consideration. The other thing that I appreciate that this grant points out is water distribution is very inconsistent. So again, depending on what we're using for a field, what we're looking at as far as water distribution, we're going to have varied results from that as well. So really taking some time to think about some of these growing aspects prior to planting obviously was really important. And again, we appreciate that they pointed these out from the study, so hopefully those pitfalls are not something that other folks run into. So again, more precise farming should increase beet yields. This can also be from aspects of what we talked about as far as weed control, water distribution, but also thinking about equipment that's actually used to plant the seed. Obviously, if we're using some equipment that's not doing great distribution for spreading those seeds out, if we don't have some equipment to help thin plants, if we're having to rely on some sort of, somebody physically doing that, that can be an issue as well. But obviously, they've pointed out that more precise farming is really important. Again, going back to the feed rations, they really anticipate, are very optimistic that if they actually, now that they kind of have a handle on these feed rations, that it should actually, increase what they have as far as weight gain and some of those other things. The last part about this is it's really important to think about this as a winter, late fall feed crop. Something that's out there that's green, can handle some frost periods, something that's going to be great to help extend that grazing season throughout the fall and winter, provide a really great food source and a lot of it. So this is where, there's a lot of drive, a lot of hype to actually try this plant, fodder beets and other scenarios. But it was really great to see some of the optimism that was out there for this plant that was described in the actual grant. So, this is a quick overview. I'd encourage you to go back through and actually check out, the grant FW 18-013 to take a look and see it, some more of the details of exactly what was found in the study. There's also some great information regarding the nutrient value of all the different plants as they were harvested. So they've got some great information as far as the beet tops and the beet bulbs as well.
Well, Brian did a great job of outlining this project, as well as talking about some of the costs associated with doing a project like this. But I wanted to look at this from an economic perspective and just think about how you might analyze this on your own operation. So in this case, I think a partial budget's a great way to look at this project. And in this example, we've got a partial budget here where we're going to plant some fodder beets. And if we look at this partial budget tool, we really, through this process, ask ourselves 4 questions whenever we're doing an analysis of whether something is going to make sense on our operation. And those 4 questions are: what additional costs will I incur from this project? What income might be reduced or eliminated because of this project? What additional income can I expect because of this project? And what are costs that might be reduced because of this project? So when we looked at this project, we looked at additional costs first. And you can see we've got seeding costs, planting costs, herbicide costs in here, fertilizer and irrigation. And, these, in terms of the actual costs that we have here, they will definitely vary depending on year and your operation. So, you need to research those numbers for your own operation to make sure that those costs are accurate. This is just a method to show you how you might do that on your operation. But if we add up all of these additional costs, we get $552 per acre for additional costs associated with this project. We couldn't really think of any income that would be reduced by implementing this project, by adding these fodder beets. And we couldn't really think of any costs that we were going to reduce by adding these fodder beets. But in terms of additional income, we do have the fodder beets themselves. So, in some of those best case scenarios that Brian outlined, as much as 6 tons to the acre. If we value those at $100 a ton, that's $600 an acre return. So if we look at net income or loss, that's a $48 per acre net income on this project. Now, obviously, you're going to have some different costs associated with this project. You may also want to include labor and also think about some of the risk associated with the project. and you might not be able to see that 6-ton improvement when you plant. But this is the way that you might look at this from an economics perspective. And in this case, we can show that we'll have a $48 an acre net positive income from this project. Well, thanks for watching this video in this series for Western Sara. We would like to thank Western Sara for being a sponsor. We hope you enjoyed these videos. Please comment below if you have any suggestions, or if you would like other projects for us to analyze in the future. We appreciate you being with us, and hope you enjoy the rest of the videos.